What happens when we begin to realize that the 200-year experiment we've called the American healthcare system has failed? Tune in to Awakened Wellness with Mylaine Riobe, MD, and join the conversation about how to heal our broken system to reverse our current health crisis. The entire world is looking for answers, and the truth is hidden in plain sight. Learn how spirituality, ancient traditions, and cutting-edge science are merging to create a new paradigm of wellness every Wednesday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time, with live video shows every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, when you can call in and ask the questions that matter most to you.
Hey everybody, welcome to Awakened Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobe, and we're live here on Dream Vision 7 Radio, and our number is 646-558-8656, and go ahead and hit *9 to raise your hand or ask a question or make a comment. All right, so today's topic is mind versus brain. Will you take the blue pill or the red pill? And so Rachel and I always have these synchronicities going. She was telling me about a show she watched yesterday talking about quantum entanglement and such. So we're going to be touching on stuff like that and how it has to do with health. And so welcome to today's show. And so mind versus brain, right? When we hear people talking about the mind and the brain, they're often interchanged. They're often confused for each other. And there isn't really defined terminology for the word mind. And that's part of the problem. We all have, excuse me, we all have a pretty good understanding of what the brain is in terms of, more or less what it does. But the mind, often we get confused and we think it's the same thing and that they're interchangeable. And really they're not. And so in order for people to begin to understand that there's a difference between the mind and the brain, we have to stop, interchanging them in terms of how we call different functions and things that we do. Let me just make sure. Okay. And so the brain, right? The brain is a physical structure. It's a 3D structure. We can carve it out of our heads. We can do autopsies on it, so we can see a physical structure when we look at a brain. We can do x-rays and CAT scans and MRIs, and we'll see very clearly there's a physical structure in our skulls that we call the brain. It's got two halves connected by a little bridge in the middle, and so we understand it to be critical for our bodies to function, right? If we sever the brain from the rest of us, we die instantaneously. The reason for that is the brain does send signals that beats your heart, helps you breathe, and of course does all kinds of other things, but the beating of the heart and the breath are critical to function. And so if we cut that off, we would die instantaneously. And so the brain, with good reason, has gotten a very important status as far as one of the organs of the human body, and it pretty much sits at the top in most people's minds, and even in most doctors' minds and most scientists' minds, except for theoretical or quantum physicists who are understanding now that the brain is actually not the most important structure in the human body. And that there are other systems that actually have better control over the brain than the brain has control over them. And the human heart is one of those systems that we're going to talk about today. And so what does the brain do, right? We don't know, of course, all of the functions of the human brain, but we can pretty much assign just about every body function to the human brain. And what it does is it sends signals. So it sends the circuits, back and forth. It's like a motherboard on a computer, that will send circuitry and electricity back and forth to allow processes to occur. So while the brain doesn't do the work of the other organs and systems in your body, it is responsible for sending the signals down that will result in those systems, those cells performing the functions that the brain would want them to function. And so heartbeat, breathing, like we talked about just a minute ago, the act of thinking, right? For the brain to actually think, it also has to send signals throughout itself. And then also for you to see, the brain has to send a signal there for you to smell, for you to taste, for you to speak, for you to move, everything, digestion, all of it is orchestrated by the human brain. Now, when you look at the human brain, it has substructures of importance. And so the very middle of the human brain, so if you were to look at a CAT scan or an MRI, that would slice the brain right in half like this and look at it from the side, right in the middle, you would see basically the most important sections of your brain. The pineal gland is there, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, centers of execution of critical body functions. So the nerves that make your heart beat and your lungs breathe are in the middle of your brain. And so they're in the middle of your brain for a reason, because that's the closest to your heart. And so when your heart beats, it sends fresh, oxygenated, nourished blood up to your brain pretty much first. And the middle of your brain gets blood flow before any other part of your brain does. And that's also partly responsible for the development of Alzheimer's dementia later in life. So your brain doesn't have to send blood flow to the rest of itself if it doesn't want to. It can keep it in the middle and then decide to send nutrients and other things to other areas of your body, which your body actually does very intelligently. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to feed your brain at all. It's not going to necessarily result in you having a stroke or anything of that nature. But what the body does, it's really smart, is it distributes nutrients and oxygen to where it wants to send it based on immediate survival. And so if the middle of your brain is responsible for immediate survival, which it is, it's going to get the freshest, best flow of blood that your body can deliver to it. And then if there's enough for the rest of those critical areas throughout the rest of your body, it will send it to the rest of the brain. But if there isn't enough, it'll just send enough to keep those cells alive and send those resources somewhere else. It's kind of like a train going along on a track, right? If it knows it has to deliver stuff to 100 different train stations, and for whatever reason, it doesn't have enough to send to all 100, it's going to start to ration, right? And so what your body does is it rations based on immediate survival. It doesn't ration based on what it thinks you would like it to do. It rations based on what it must do to keep you alive, which is basically beating your heart and breathing your lungs and not much else. And so your brain is responsible for all of those decisions, all of those executive functions. It's your brain that makes those choices and those decisions. There's also what we call the autonomic nervous system, which is the background nervous system that's on autopilot. It's the one that's making a lot of those executive decisions. It's what we would equate to the subconscious mind, but it's really the subconscious brain and not the subconscious mind, which we'll talk about today. So within your brain structure, there's the conscious brain, which is the thinker. It's like, oh, okay, 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4, or it's cold outside, let me put on a sweater, or it's raining, I better grab my umbrella. It's also the center that says, oh, something frightening has just happened. Let me panic a little, right? But then there's also the subconscious brain that's going to notice that you better panic long before your conscious brain notices. So there's 2 sections of your brain. There's one that's consciously and actively thinking, and then there's one that is kind of subconscious. It's the one that notices things really fast and instantaneously. It's your fight or flight system. It's your autonomic nervous system. So if your brain senses a threat, before you know there's an actual threat, your brain will execute subconscious stress responses into your body, and you'll quickly turn, but by the time you actually get the signal and turn, your body has already responded with more rapid heartbeat. It's already responded with pumping more sugar into your bloodstream so you can run or fight from whatever it doesn't know yet what's happening over there. So there's an instantaneous, I'm going to do this before I even know I'm actually doing it. And that's where subconscious fears creep in. That's where subconscious self-limiting beliefs creep in. And then there's the part of your brain that's the active thinker that will then kind of turn and look and say, oh, that's nothing. That's just a branch that fell off the tree. It's not a predator coming after me. You know, and then your brain will say, okay, we can calm down now. And it will send signals that will calm you down. But before you know what happened, you're startled, right? So there's two layers of brain function that are really important to know. And they both can do you in if you're not careful. So that's the brain. And then there's the mind. The mind is not a physical structure. It is not something that we can see with x-rays. It's not something that if we dissected a body, we would be able to point to and say, this is the mind, as opposed to this is the brain. And so the mind is more kind of ethereal. It's more energetic, right? As opposed to the brain, which is basically what we perceive to be a solid structure. The mind is housed in the heart, according to traditional Chinese medicine. So if you read Chinese medicine textbooks, they will distinguish the brain from the mind. And they're not suggesting that that your brain is in your heart. They understand it to be in your head. But when they talk about the mind, they say it's housed in your heart. And that's really important to know because that's a 4,000-year-old premise that was essentially proven true in science back in the 1990s and has been continued to be proven true with more advanced scientific research since that time. Even Albert Einstein touched on it 100 years ago, although he didn't identify anything in the human heart. He identified what we call today quantum entanglement. And so in traditional Chinese medicine, the mind is an etheric, energetic system. And they say that the mind is everywhere. In traditional Chinese medicine, although the heart houses the mind, it's not contained in the heart. It's just housed in the heart. So it's not confined to the heart, in other words. And in fact, the Institute of Heart Math has done a lot of research on these cells that are in the human heart that mimic a brain, but they're not actually, obviously, your brain. And what they have noticed is the electromagnetic field that comes from the human heart is at least 100 times stronger than the electromagnetic field emitted by the human brain. The other scientific discovery that was made in the 1990s in Canada, when they discovered about 40,000 neurons in the human heart that were not heart cells. And these are the neurons that are responsible for this electromagnetic field that's 100 times stronger than the one emitted by the brain. This group of 40,000 cells in the heart was coined heart brain. But again, it's not a brain, it's a mind. And in traditional Chinese medicine, it's called mind. And we get confused when we call this the brain and this the brain, right? So this is mind, this is brain. And in traditional Chinese medicine, they say that the mind is everywhere and that the brain is in your head. And so they distinguish these two organs very definitively and on purpose in traditional Chinese medicine. If we look at ancient traditions, even religions, so for example, in Catholicism and Christianity, we say that the soul or the spirit is in the human heart, right? We talk about the sacred heart. Many other ancient traditions will tell us to look within ourselves to find the truth. And so what they're referring to is what was scientifically discovered finally thousands of years later as what is coined heart brain that should really probably be called mind. And so The other discovery that was made with these neurons in the human heart is that they send 40 times more nerve input to your brain than your brain sends to your heart. So for at least 100 years in our Western medical model, we have placed the brain above the heart and said that the brain basically commands the heart. And that's kind of being proven true. I'm sorry, that's being proven false, I should say, based on more modern scientific inquiry. And so what we're understanding is, no, actually the mind is above the brain. And the mind then downloads into the brain, and then the brain distributes that information. Now, that's tricky because your brain, remember, houses all of your fears. It houses all of your beliefs, whether they be true or false. And so what happens is the mind, which is everywhere. When the Chinese say the mind is everywhere, they don't mean everywhere in your body. They mean everywhere, like infinitely everywhere. And so what the Chinese described as the mind is what we're beginning to understand in modern scientific terms as what is being called collective consciousness. There is a consciousness that is out there that's not housed in the brain that communicates. So people can communicate with each other through it. That's that intuitive hit that moms get when their kids need them, right? And all of a sudden the phone rings and it's your kid calling you. It's that is the collective consciousness. So there's a web out there. We used to call it the ethers, or ether actually as the fifth element. But it's what we would identify as mind. And it's a collective consciousness where information is basically exchanged without the passage of time. And that's been scientifically proven now with various experiments to the point where we're beginning to create actual quantum internets where information will travel on the internet, not at the speed of light, which is fast enough, but instantaneously. So the speed of light, I think if I remember right, is like 186,000 miles per second, I think it is. If I'm not wrong about that. So that's pretty fast. Instantaneous is way faster than that. There's no passage of time whatsoever. And so there are studies now where we were talking about this, Rachel and I, before the show started, where I think it was Switzerland, if I remember the location of the scientific experiment where they split a photon in half. And they put one 14 miles away from the other. So they were entangled, they were together, they got split. So they were kind of like twins. And then one was put 14 miles away from the other. And they made the conditions such that they could tell that there was no passage of time or whether there was passage of time. And what they did was they tickled one of the photons, or protons, I'm sorry. They tickled one of them. And what they did was they observed the other one that was 14 miles away. And what they realized is they were instantaneously in communication. Whatever you did to one, you automatically did to the other without actually physically interacting with the other. And so despite being 14 miles apart, they were what are called entangled. So through the distance, it was as though they were not in space and time. It was as though they were still one thing, even though they were 14 miles apart. And so that has been now repeated in other experiments to the point where now a couple of countries, I think China, the US, and I think, was it Switzerland or Sweden? They're developing quantum internets, which will essentially be unhackable, because if something is entangled, you can't hack it, right? It has to be traveling somewhere for you to hack it. If it doesn't have to go anywhere and it's going to be there instantaneously, in the other location, there's nowhere to hack it from. And so they're making kind of an unhackable internet. And so this technology is well underway based on scientific principles and mathematical principles that, yes, there is a mind out there, or a collective conscious, or in scientific terms, they also call it the field. There have been many experiments now done that have identified a field that is out there where things communicate instantaneously. And Princeton University actually did a fascinating study on this too, that we'll talk about right after this commercial break. You're listening to Awakened Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobe, and we'll be right back.
What happens when we begin to realize that the 200-year experiment we've called the American healthcare system has failed? Learn how spirituality, ancient traditions, and cutting-edge science are merging to create a new paradigm of wellness on Awakened Wellness with Mylaine Riobe, MD. Tune in every Wednesday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time with live video shows every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, when you can call in and ask Dr. Mylaine the questions that matter most to you. Dr. Mylaine is the medical director of the Riobe Institute of Integrative Medicine in Jupiter, Florida. For more information, visit RIOBE-integrativemedicine.com. Dream Vision 7 Radio Network invites you in for this dynamic, forward-thinking show.
Join Dr. Bernie Siegel on Mind Health Matters every Thursday and Friday, 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. Bernie will draw from his inspirational personal journey, offering us special nuggets of his sacred wisdom weaved through his delightful stories. Listen in as Bernie reminds us to be fully engaged in life.
Ever wonder what it's like to have your own radio show? Well, wonder no longer, because you can dip into the radio airwaves by being host for the day on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. It's a fabulous way to get your radio feet wet. It's an opportunity to market your business, modality, or book. Have a guest, mention a sponsor, and take callers. Or you may want to facilitate a lesson by going solo. It's up to you. Listeners can be online, mobile, in cars with Bluetooth, or listen through Amazon's Echo by asking, Alexa, play Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. For more details, go to dreamvision7radio.com and click on Host for the Day.
Delight your kids with an enchanting journey by reading the Paper Doll Kids children's book by Deborah Beauvais and Janine Sullivan. There's even a catchy tune, Kids for Love Song, produced by Bob Sherwood and sung by kids just like yours. The story weaves around 7 paper dolls flying around the world doing good deeds as they bring important attention to our endangered animal friends. There's even a magical ring with a universal message. Kids become interested in service projects, action through compassion, and planting seeds that nurture positive change. The Paper Doll Kids and Kids for Love Song are a production of the Kids for Love Project. Get the book now on Amazon Kindle and the song on CD Baby or iTunes.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
Welcome back to Awakened Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobe, and today we're talking about the mind versus the brain. Will you take the red pill or the blue pill? And so the mind, again, is the commander of the brain, right? So the mind sends 40 times the amount of nervous input to the brain than the other way around. And also the mind has an electromagnetic field that goes out of the body at least 8 to 11 feet. The machines that we would use to measure how far away from the human body this field extends, they kind of get maxed out. And so we're not really quite sure just how far the mind actually goes out away from the body. That doesn't mean it leaves you. It's still here and there. So just like, again, quantum entanglement, it's here and it's there at the same time. So it's the same thing with mind. It's here housed in the heart, but it's there everywhere at the same time. And so this is, again, the idea of a collective consciousness, and yet it's also your own consciousness. So while you participate in the collective consciousness, you have your own autonomous consciousness as well. And you can choose how much you allow in and out of the collective consciousness based on how well your brain filters the data. And therein lies the rub, right? So the mind's in charge. The mind is in pretty much instantaneous communication with all there is. However, the brain has to filter that information out. So it's pretty much to prevent overload of the circuitry, right? So if we have access to all that is, you could see how a human body could just kind of fry under those circumstances, right? So your brain is kind of like a filter that will only allow certain inputs into the body. And the way that it filters that is based on survival. And so you start to get an idea, oh, I should go do this. And then all of a sudden your brain chimes in and says, are you kidding? You can't do that. You know, you don't have the skills. You don't have the education. You know, you don't have the connections. So that's the difference. So your mind is like, go do that thing. You know, because it's an infinite communication with all that is, and it knows that that thing is the thing you should do. And how do you know? You feel it, right? Your heart shows it to you as a positive feeling, as an excitement. And then a split second later, your brain will start to filter that information and say, wait a minute, no, you can't go do that thing. You don't have the college degree. You don't have the support. You don't have, you know, X, Y, Z. And then you'll talk yourself out of it, right? Out of fear. And so we have to learn how to allow the mind to filter through the brain in such a way that the signal stays pretty clean. And then it will then override the brain, right? So there's a way you can actually kind of shut your brain off in a way. Not totally, right? We have to remember how to get home. We have to remember how to operate the car. We have to remember, you know, 1 + 1 is 2. We have to remember not to stick our fingers in electrical sockets. So we're not going to shut the brain off, but we need to shut that fear filter off so that it's not giving us all of these unconscious, subconscious, fear-based beliefs. Because then that keeps you, what that does is that actually splits you in half. So there's a part of you that got the idea. So your brain actually registered the idea from your mind, and then it decided to change it. So now you have two ideas. So you have the one that your mind wants, and then you have the one that your brain concocted out of this data, but it's based in fear. And so there's a way you can kind of shut this one down so that it allows the mind signal to continue to filter through the body, so that then you can execute on that idea that you have, that more creative, fun idea, as opposed to the one that boxes you in and you know, and forces you out of survival's sake to stay in a small box, right? So that's the difference between mind and brain. And so the Institute of Heart Math has developed breathing techniques, again, right? So how you shut that fear-based part of your brain off, you know, the one that's based in false beliefs. So you should be afraid to walk off a cliff. You should be afraid to jump out of a window. You should be afraid to stick your finger in a socket. But you should not be afraid to apply for that dream job you want. You should not be afraid to move to a new city if that's what you want to do. You should not be afraid to, you know, take the leap and open that business if that's what you feel is the right thing for you to do. And so separating and teasing those out actually depends on your breath and how you breathe. And so the Institute of Heart Math, again, that 3-minute breathing technique that we do here periodically has been shown in studies to quiet the fear-based, you know, the unreasonable fear-based brain down enough that it doesn't filter out all of the really good information coming from the mind. And so what the brain ends up doing then when you do these techniques enough is the brain just starts to settle down because the body is basically being bombarded by calming and relaxation hormones and neurotransmitters and chemistry. And so you're able then to not overreact to ideas that the brain might be frightened of. The brain likes comfort. It likes to do things that it's used to doing. It does not like change. So addiction is a really good example of how the brain interrupts the healing process. So we know that smoking cigarettes is deadly, right? We know that certain drugs are deadly, heroin and fentanyl and things like this. We know consciously our brain can think and reason, this will kill me one day, or this could kill me one day. And you would think that the brain would be like, I better not do that again, right? But there's again, the subconscious part of your brain that's even more powerful than that thinking logical part of your brain says, but I have to have it to survive right now. It might kill me later, but I need it now to survive because I don't think I can survive without it now. So your body doesn't know how to tell time. It doesn't know this addiction will kill me 10 years from now, or this addiction might kill me a month from now. It only knows what's happening to me right now. And if your body is addicted to a substance or a thought, those cravings will come at such a pace that your brain will want to stop it immediately. And so that will lead to taking the addictive substance, even though our brain also knows it's deadly. It's going to hedge its bets and say, it'll probably kill me later, not right now. And so the human brain has two sides. And so we need to understand which side is talking to me right now, and how do I put that side to bed if it's not giving me a good feeling. So nature implanted in us our emotions to help us to decipher, is this my mind talking or is this my brain talking? Right? If it feels really good and it makes you happy and it brings you a lot of feelings of joy and fulfillment, it's your mind. If there's an underlying angst and anxiety and fear and hesitation, it's your brain, right? And that's the best way to tell them apart. And so the breathing techniques will shut the fear-based side of your brain down to allow your mind to just keep flooding your body with these positive feel-good hormones. And so you'll be able to make better choices. You'll be able to be more what we call intuitively led or guided, as opposed to led out of fear. So that's the critical, delineation between mind and brain. So you're not going to turn your brain off. We don't want to shut it off completely. We want to control which side of it is working, and we want to make sure that side is fully coordinated with the mind at all times, if possible, right? And so that's what heart math breathing actually does. So I think we've got some questions here. Question: if my heart is slightly damaged due to bad diet, does this affect my mind's ability? No, actually. Again, your mind is not a physical structure. And so it has nothing to do with the physical condition of your heart. It's actually independent of that. So it's housed in what we would identify as a physical structure we call the heart that beats our blood and does all these things, but it is independent of the heart in a sense. And so, no, heart damage does not affect your mind's ability at all. Now, it might affect your brain because if your heart doesn't pump well oxygenated blood, et cetera, up to the brain sufficiently, then, that could be a problem for your brain. And then you might have difficulty remembering important things and et cetera. But no, it won't affect it. Now, that doesn't mean we want to let our physical bodies just fall apart. Absolutely not. The more that your physical body is healthy, the easier it is, because the same thing that keeps your physical body healthy is the same thing that turns off the fear-based thinking in your brain. It's the same chemistry that keeps your physical body healthy as shuts that physical part of your brain that's always in fear mode. And so there's a way that good health and a healthy mind are in alignment. But no, it shouldn't inhibit you either. That's a good question. That's a great question. Question, ethereal, moms knowing, how do I learn more? Yeah, no, that's, well, how do you learn more? Gosh, you go to the Institute of Heart Math. So they've done a ton of research on this, 25 years plus of research. They have shown that people who master their breathing techniques and are in what they call high coherence. So high coherence is when you have successfully put your mind over your brain, and now your mind is basically in control of your brain, if you will. So they call that high coherence. You can see that they actually have an app that you can download. It's called Inner Balance. And you can actually buy a sensor from the Institute of Heart Math. It's a biofeedback sensor. It's really cool because it will show you on the screen if you are in high coherence or not. So the goal is to be in high coherence, and you do that through the control of your breath. And then what you want to do is you don't want to just do it while you're looking at the app, right? You want to bring the way that you're breathing into everything that you do. So while you're working, you want to remind yourself, am I breathing well? Should I, can I improve my breathing while I'm doing this? Now, obviously, if you're running down the street, or playing a sport, you can't do heart math breathing. You would pass out, right? So, but anytime you're sitting still, driving, in line at the grocery store, walking gently in the street, you can do heart math breathing. So the point of the app is to develop that habit so that you breathe that way all the time, unless you're running or, in some type of physical activity where you have to gulp down your breath, you should be doing heart math breathing. And so that's where I would suggest you learn more. We teach this in my online course, the 9-week transformation program, the Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation program. Week 1 is all about mindset. And we've had results with people beating fatigue in as little as a week just from the mindset stuff. So this stuff's really, really important. And so what other scientific proof do we have that this mind thing actually exists, right? I think her name is Lynn Taggart. She is the one that's done a lot of the research into what is now called the field. Princeton University has also done some studies. The most mind-blowing study, I think they're still doing it. I don't think they've shut this study down yet, but they've been doing it probably for about 30 years, Princeton. And what they did was they put computers into labs in 120 different countries, 120 or 130. And it's a computer, and the computer is a number generator. So it either generates a 0 or a 1. It's like flipping a coin. You either get a heads or a tails. And that's all this computer does all day, all night, is it generates numbers. 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1. It just keeps flipping coins, if you will, and getting heads, tails, heads, tails, 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 heads, heads, whatever it is. And then it just keeps coming up with these numbers. All the labs all over the globe send that information to Princeton University. They have this supercomputer there that analyzes all that data. Now, math will tell us if we flip coins enough, we'll get roughly 50% heads, roughly 50% tails. So for a number generator generating 0 or 1, you get roughly 50% zeros, roughly 50% ones, right? So we call that's kind of like a random distribution of numbers. And so Princeton University was just analyzing this data to see if there would be any non-random number sequences that they could analyze. And so they would occasionally see these non-random number sequences. So in other words, it would just keep landing on heads over and over and over and over, in a lot of labs all over the world. So they call that non-random. And so they would see this happen like with natural disasters. When there was a natural disaster, the numbers would become non-random. Suddenly the computers would be getting all heads, all zeros. And they would see these spikes in non-random numbers. And then the numbers would become random again after the event passed. They would see it for presidential elections. They would see it for, unrest in various countries. They would see a spike in the non-random numbers. And then 9/11 happened in the United States. And this was the most mind-blowing thing I'd ever read. And if it wasn't Princeton University, I wouldn't believe it. But what they found is there was a huge, they said it was the largest non-random spike they had ever seen. And they had already been doing this study for years and years and years before September 11th happened. They saw the largest by a lot non-random spike that they had ever seen before. And I think to this day, it remains the largest. So, September 11th was well over 20 years ago. And it wasn't that there was this huge non-random spike when September 11th happened. It was the time at which the non-random spike actually occurred. And so, we all remember this day, I guess like generations before us, remember the Kennedy assassination. Like all my relatives know where they were when JFK passed. And so, for my generation, like we all know where we were when we heard about 9/11. So it was like 8:30 in the morning when the first airplane crashed into the World Trade Center. This non-random spike didn't occur at 8:30 or 9 a.m. It actually happened 4 hours before the first plane hit. So it actually happened at 4:30 in the morning of 9/11, September 11th, 2001. And so it happened 4 hours before the actual event, which was it's mind-blowing. So it begs the question, did we know it was going to happen, or did we actually cause it, with the collective consciousness, if you will? And so, of course, that's not an answerable question, but it's mind-blowing. And so that's, again, evidence that there is a communication among people who don't know each other in some way that affects everything, including our technologies, to make a computer generate a 0 or a 1 in a very non-random way. And so there is ample evidence, and I'm only scratching the surface about the evidence that there is for a collective consciousness or a mind. But what's important to know is you're not at the whim of the collective consciousness. You also have a consciousness. And so again, as you work on yourself and you quiet those fear-based false beliefs of your brain, you are less subjected to the collective consciousness. In other words, it doesn't affect you as much. So that's equivalent to the premise of being in the world, but not of the world. So again, you can be in the world. You can know that this event has taken place, and you can empathize with those who may have been affected by it. You can donate to the cause. You can do all those things, but you don't have to necessarily go down with it or lose your center because of it. And that's being in the world, but not of the world. So that's having your own autonomous consciousness, because we are all autonomous beings. We are here, as our own separate entities. Although we participate in a community, we are, a community unto ourselves. And so, there's good scientific evidence to show that the center of the universe is wherever you are. So if we were to move to Alpha Centauri, that would become the center of the universe. And I learned about that through astrophysics. And so that's a scientific principle. It's not woo-woo. Neil deGrasse Tyson will tell us about that. In fact, he was the one who I heard say it. And I had read it before, but I had never heard anyone in the scientific community say it in public until he said it. But wherever you are is the center of the universe. And so we have our own, we are central, we are our own centralized universe, and we commingle with everybody else's centralized universe. And so this is where the idea of multidimensionality will come in, right? And so I think we have to go to our next commercial break. So we have some questions. We're going to address those on the next, when we come back from this commercial break. You're listening to Awaken Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobe. We'll be right back.
What happens when we begin to realize that the 200-year experiment we've called the American healthcare system has failed? Learn how spirituality, ancient traditions, and cutting-edge science are merging to create a new paradigm of wellness on Awakened Wellness with Mylaine Riobe, MD. Tune in every Wednesday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time with live video shows every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, when you can call in and ask Dr. Mylaine the questions that matter most to you. Dr. Mylaine is the medical director of the Riobe Institute of Integrative Medicine in Jupiter, Florida. For more information, visit RIOBE-integrativemedicine.com. Dream Vision 7 Radio Network invites you in for this dynamic, forward-thinking show.
ECSTATIC is a U.S. nonprofit dedicated to the dream of ending childhood malnutrition for millions of children around the world. Through the manufacture of Plumpy Nut and other nutrient-rich peanut-based ready-to-use foods, ECSTATIC has already delivered life and hope to nearly 1 million children in over 26 developing countries. To find out how you can join ECSTATIC's dream of ending childhood malnutrition, please visit ECSTATICglobal.org.
What if dreams can diagnose your life? What if we can meet the love of our life in dreams? Join host Kat O'Keefe Canavas, the #1 internationally best-selling author of Dreams That Can Save Your Life, written with Duke University medical doctor Larry Burke. Dreaming Healing is where we'll explore dreams, research, and interpret dreams from you, the caller. Dreaming Healing shows can be heard every Tuesday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, with live shows on the first and third evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific Time on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. Come live your dreams out loud with Kat.
Are you searching for a way to help create global change? Dream Vision 7 Radio Network's vision is to have an eclectic group of radio hosts dedicated to educating, enlightening, and helping humankind with positive messages and tools that enhance lives using different modalities and programs. If you would like to join our team and help illuminate the universe, call Deborah at 508-226-1723 or Deborah at dreamvision7radio.com. This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
Welcome back to Awakened Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobe, and today we are talking about the mind versus the brain. Will you take the red pill or the blue pill? And so we have a question here: can the mind be God? It could, I guess, depending on how you would define God, but I guess we would have to say that God is undefinable. And so I think maybe it's an aspect of God, but I don't know if it defines what God is, if that makes sense. My personal philosophy is pretty much everything is God, right? So no matter where we're looking, we're actually looking at some type of projection of God into the world. And so the collective consciousness is likely that as well, but I don't think God is confined to that, if that makes sense. That's another great question. Is there a way to improve my connection to mind? Yes, your breath. Every single breath you take, it actually either shuts the fear-based thoughts down or it lets them fly. It's like, again, flipping a coin. You either get heads or tails. You either take the blue pill or the red pill every time you take a breath. And so focusing on how you breathe and remembering to breathe through your nostrils, in and out. Mouth breathing is useful for certain things, but it's really a fight or flight method of breathing. And so the nostrils, that's why they're much smaller, right? You're not going to get a huge gulp of air through your nostrils, but that's the point. Your body understands, if I need to take a huge gulp of air, something's wrong. And so if you breathe through your nostrils in and out, your body then senses that there's nothing to worry about, that there's nothing to panic about. And we all experience this, right? If we see something happen, we go, and then we look, right? So comes right after the subconscious brain says panic. And then the logical brain says about what, right? But meanwhile, you've taken a big gulp of air just in case you have to run, right? And so some people will even start running before they even know what they're running away from, right? But the first thing they have to do before their legs will take them anywhere is take a huge gulp of air. And so it's a fight or flight response to take a gulp of air. And so you want to make sure that you're breathing through the nostrils. You want to work on getting up to 5 seconds in and then 5 seconds out. So 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out is that magic number where your body is convinced there's not possibly anything that could be happening to you, because there's no way you could take a 10-second breath if you were about to run away from a predator or if you were in danger. So that's the way to kind of get the mind to shut down the brain so that the signal gets through more clearly, is literally through your breath. So that's another phenomenal question. It sounds like something I read in a study of early mysticism. Yep. Chinese medicine, is it in any way connected to those ancient teachings? Very much. They're all very similar. The Kabbalah, Chinese medicine, certain Gnostic teachings, Ayurveda, ancient Egyptian, ancient African traditions. They'll basically say the same thing. It's just that the languages are different, right? But if you translate the languages in their purest form, they're saying the same thing. When the Chinese say damp, what they mean to us in our language is inflammation. When the Chinese say heat, what that means in our language is acidity. So you just have to kind of know, how does this translate, and keep that as pure as possible, and you'll realize they're all saying the same things. So that's a great question. But yes, Chinese medicine was actually extremely spiritual until the Communist Revolution, when they stripped the spirituality out of Chinese medicine. Now they couldn't strip it out completely, because in order to practice Chinese medicine, you have to understand the concept of mind versus brain, and that the mind is housed in the heart. Because when you're treating someone with anxiety or depression, you have to understand that the mind houses the heart to understand how to prescribe herbs and do acupuncture and all those things. So they couldn't totally strip the spirituality out, but they tried to take out as much as they could. So yes. And question, can my brain be controlled to help with my overeating and other addictions? Absolutely. Now, it's not easy. Your brain's not going to give up without a fight. It's not just going to be like, she figured me out, I'm just going to pack my bags and leave, right? It's going to be like, is she crazy? I got to dig in my heels. This chick doesn't know what she's talking about. She's trying to override me. She must be trying to die. She must have a death wish. Let me dig my heels in just a little bit further. Maybe she'll give up, right? So there's this will. There has to be a will, and then a commitment to just keep doing it over and over and over and over. And then what you do is you flip that, right? And you say, everything that makes me afraid, I'm going to use as an opportunity to remember to breathe. Right now, if it's a legitimate fear, you're driving in your car and all of a sudden a car veers out of its lane and is heading right towards you, that's a legitimate fear, right? We don't want to be like, let me do my heart math breathing and see what happens, right? We want to react immediately, get ourselves to safety. And then once we know that we're safe after a legitimate fear, then where's my heart math breathing? Let me get that to kick in. So you want it to become your new habit. So we're all creatures of addiction, right? That's how the body works. We're not going to override that part of our bodies, but what we can override is what it's addicted to. Is it addicted to good health and proper breathing and working out, or is it addicted to sugar and coffee and, whatever? So that's a choice that we get to make. The human body functions based on addiction in the sense that it functions based on habitual function. So it likes to have habits. It doesn't want to think, how am I going to move from here to there? Oh, I got to lift up my foot and it does it automatically. That's a habit, or what we could call an addiction, right? But I guess we could separate them out as useful addictions and not useful addictions, right? So you're not going to get out of that part of your human function, but you can choose what you want your body to habituate in doing, if that makes sense. So if you want it to habituate in being healthy, then you train it in that way. And again, the most important thing is your breath, because it doesn't matter if you go see the trainer and you work out at the gym. If you're constantly in fear, despite that, you're only going to get so far. It's not going to be not useful that you've gone to the gym, but you're not going to get the benefit of having gone to the gym maximized the way you could if the mindset was already there, if the breathing was already there, if the body had that fertilizer from every breath you take and all of the really good, hormones and chemicals and neurotransmitters downloading into your body to create the fertilizer that will give you the new habit. If you have that going, then the workout is going to be just that much more beneficial to you. Eating properly is going to be just that much more beneficial to you, and you'll be able to stay on the wagon longer, right? So if you have the mindset in place, the habits are easier to switch from the not useful side to the useful side, right? So my addictions are, I go to the gym, I meditate every day. Like the world could be falling apart around me. You will find me sitting on my meditation cushion at the same time every morning, right? And that's just, it's my addiction. It's my habit, the gym, so it's not that you want to get rid of the addiction. You want to flip what you're addicted to, if that makes sense. So that's a wonderful question as well. Start with your breath. Like that's literally the best place to start. And then you'll get ideas. You'll get intuitive hits to decide to eat differently. You'll get intuitive hits to maybe take a class, a cooking class, or, intuitive hits to do certain things that were too clouded because your brain was too busy blocking those ideas from your mind, downloading them into your body, if that makes sense. So I think that is all the time we have for today's show. I hope that this was helpful to you. And thank you so much for all your wonderful questions and comments. And until next time, many, many blessings. Thank you. And if you're interested in our Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation course, visit awakenedwellnessnow.com. We're also on Instagram, and you have a YouTube channel, also called Awakened Wellness Now. So, all right. Thank you. Until next time, many blessings.
Join us next time on Awakened Wellness with Mylaine Riobe, MD, to learn how spirituality, ancient traditions, and cutting-edge science are merging to create a new paradigm of wellness. Awakened Wellness airs every Wednesday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time, with live video shows every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern of each month. Meanwhile, you can join our Facebook page at facebook.com/awakenedwellness and let us know what you'd like to discuss on future episodes. Dr. Mylaine is the medical director of the Riobe Institute of Integrative Medicine in Jupiter, Florida. For more information, visit riobeintegrativemedicine.com. This show is part of the Dream Vision 7 radio network.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.